Welcome. This is our family meal planning lunch and learn. I'm Chelsea Hemmenway, and I'm really excited to talk about this topic. I feel like this is always a continued question and conversation I have with many of my clients. Today's talk is not just going to be about what food we're wanting to serve our families to encourage healthy eating, but also how to set up those positive mealtime experiences to really help foster a healthy relationship to food and body. So I wanted to start with this wonderful quote. This is from Sumner Brooks and Amy Severson, which are pictured here. They have a great book called How to Raise an Intuitive Eater that I highly recommend for parents. And this quote says, "It's more important to maintain a peaceful and positive association with food and meals than it is to force your child to eat something they don't like or to which they have an aversion." So I wanted to start with this quote because I think it helps remind us that there are other important factors to remember as we're building our family meal times and meal planning for our family. It's not just about what we're serving, but also how we're serving it and the environment we're setting up, it's complicated, right? There's a lot to it. So we'll be getting into that more today, as well as talking about food ideas too. I'm Chelsea Hemmenway, and I'm a certified nutritionist and national board certified health and wellness coach. I work with clients usually from fertility, trying to conceive, and preconception, throughout pregnancy, postpartum, and parenthood. And a lot of times I also will support parents with feeding their kids from any age through infancy to teenage years. And I also work a lot with intuitive eating and kind of bring that into most of my work. And we'll be kind of bringing that in today too. And I work at Starkle Nutrition, and this is our wonderful team. We're based in Seattle, but we see clients all over Washington and have providers all over Washington state and beyond. And as you can see, we have quite a lot of providers, and we all kind of see different types of clients and focus on different specialty areas, which is really fun. And yeah, we have an awesome team. All right, jumping into our presentation today, I wanted to start with Ellen Satter's division of responsibilities. This is something that I tend to start with a lot with my clients. And I think this is super helpful for just building some framework around meal times. And for those of you that don't know, Ellen Satter is a dietitian and feeding therapist who's internationally recognized for her work on eating and family feeding dynamics. And she developed this division of responsibility in meal planning. And this division of responsibility kind of breaks things up between the caregiver and parent role and then the child or teen role. And so parents and caregivers are responsible for these three elements. So what food is offered, when meals and snacks are served, and where the meal or snack takes place. So for example, if we're thinking about maybe breakfast, say we're offering like pancakes, yogurt, and berries, for example, and maybe these meals and snacks are offered, or maybe this breakfast is offered at 8 a.m. at the table. So those are kind of those three key elements that parent or caregiver is responsible for. And then the child, which this could be younger child, like an older infant or toddler, or a child or teen, they are responsible for how much food they eat from what's available and whether they eat the foods that are offered. So this is where it gets a little bit more tricky, right? It's like we can't necessarily force our kids to eat everything on their plate or all the types of foods we offer. And that's where some of that mealtime environment strategy can kind of come into play. And this division of responsibility tends to be really helpful for these different areas. So it really helps to develop trust, like trusting that our kids will get what they need to be healthy, that they'll eat enough to nourish their body, to feel full. It helps to include a variety of foods. So we're thinking about both nourishing, healthy foods and enjoyable foods too. And really all foods can fit into this division of responsibility model. We also want to focus on building predictable eating times so that our kids can know that the next meal or snack is coming relatively soon in the next couple of hours. And also reducing pressure and stress around meals. I think that's where taking away some of that control from parents, having to put pressure on our kids to try everything or clean their plate. Kind of taking away some of that pressure can really help reduce stress around meals and encourage kids to try new foods and explore. And we also adjust this model based on the child's age. So we'll kind of go through the different eating ages, but ultimately we want to focus on what's developmentally appropriate for each child based on their age. Let's start here with the younger ones. So this developmental or division of responsibility can really start in kind of older infants. So usually around 6 months, when we're starting to introduce solids, we can start thinking about this division of responsibility. So older babies, around 6 months or older through toddlerhood, we can start to really introduce them to those family meals. So kind of bringing in some food food from the family meal, kind of based on what's appropriate, encouraging self-feeding. I know we're seeing some spoon feeding here, which is awesome to mix in too, but kind of encouraging some self-feeding and messiness can be really helpful. And just starting to build more predictable meal times rather than feeding on demand, like in more early infancy. And then moving into the preschool age. So as kids get a little bit older, we can continue to have those predictable meals and snacks. Usually kids are having 3 meals and 2 to 3 snacks at this age. And this helps to really create that predictability again, and kind of avoiding the grazing between meals, which can also include like milk and juice. Kind of drinking throughout the day can be considered grazing, and snacking throughout the day, that tends to make things a little bit trickier at meal times. Kids are maybe not as hungry if they're grazing all day, so it's harder to encourage them to try those new foods. So again, kind of having those predictable set times, and then allowing them to plate their own food when possible. So having some family style meals mixed in can be really helpful. Usually like dinner tends to be a little bit more, this tends to be like a better time. Because I know sometimes like quicker meals like breakfast, maybe it's easier to plate the food for the kids, but wherever you can, allowing them to have a little bit more of that autonomy to plate their own food. And as kids get a little bit older, so we're thinking more about school age, this is where we can bring in a little bit more autonomy. So I like to start with like the after school snack. This tends to be a great time to start helping our kids have some more independence when it comes to their food choices. So you could kind of provide some framework for them. Like for example, maybe preparing maybe some fruit, kind of having it washed and ready, or cutting up some vegetables, and then having them choose something to go with it. So maybe they're getting to pick out what they're having with that fruit, whether that's maybe something like a fun food with that, or maybe some like cheese or crackers or anything else that's around. So kind of giving them that choice of adding something to it. Other times it can be helpful too to have sort of like a snack basket or drawer that kids can grab like 1 or 2 things from when they get home from school. This just kind of gives them that support while also encouraging the independence. And we can continue to have those predictable family meals too. All right, and then moving into teenage years, we want to, of course, continue those predictable meals where we can. I feel like schedules tend to get busier at this time. And I see that we have like wine in this picture. That's definitely not teenagers in the picture, but just wanted to point that out. But yeah, we want to continue those predictable meals and really encourage more of that autonomy as kids are getting into the teenage years. So we can encourage more responsibility for eating regular meals and snacks with our teens by even just kind of like gently asking them things throughout the day. Like for example, if they're mornings can be really rushed, maybe even asking them like, hey, what's the plan for breakfast? Do you want to grab something at school, or can I help you pack something for on the go? Or maybe helping them pack an after school snack to have before practice. This helps to build those skills, those eating skills, to encourage independent eating once they leave the home. So kind of helping them remember to feed and nourish their bodies throughout the day. It's because there is a lot going on for kids, especially with different activities in school and just so much taking away from their or so much that they're focusing on throughout the day that it might be hard to remember to feed themselves. So still giving them that independence and autonomy while helping to give that support too. Um, and let's see, and just teens too tend to have more and more control around their meals as they're away from the home more. Maybe they're eating out more with friends or eating away from the home. So they're kind of having more of those meals outside of the house, but still having those family meals when you can. Okay, so we kind of talked about each of the feeding ages. So as the division of responsibility kind of shifts throughout those years, you can kind of see the changes that happen. But ultimately, those beginning principles that we started with do kind of stay the same, right? Parents are in charge of the what, when, and where, and then the kids and teens are in charge of how much and whether they're eating the food. And then I wanted to dive into more of the logistics of meal planning. So kind of helps to break down each meal to start with. So as you're planning, especially family dinners, I think is a popular one that you're kind of maybe doing more planning on. We want to think about these different components of the meal. And first thing on the list here is a good protein source. This can be different kind of depending on your family's preferences. So if you're wanting more like plant proteins, there's tofu and tempeh, maybe doing like beans or lentils, or different meats like chicken, or even doing some like fish or seafood. Those proteins are all great to kind of start with to make sure you have a good one on your meal. Then usually having one or even two starches tends to be really helpful, especially if you're nervous about picky eaters in the household. Usually the starchy foods like breads, potatoes, rice, and grains, those tend to be well accepted by kids. So if you have more of the picky eaters, maybe choosing two of those starches. That way you know there's something at the meal that each person's going to be eating. And then ideally choosing a fruit, veggie, or both for the meal, some sort of a fat source. So this could even be like the oil that you're using to cook the vegetable or the protein. You could be adding some sort of nut or nut butter or seed, or avocados are another delicious option. And then having some sort of beverage. You could have like milk or water or teas, hot cocoa, whatever that might look like for your family. But yeah, kind of starting with this outline can be helpful as you're kind of piecing things together, especially if you're not choosing specific recipes for your family meals. Just kind of having these different components can be a good place to start. And some different strategies to think about. So again, we kind of want to go back to that beginning slide of like, we want to be creating these calmer, happier meal times. So some of the things that we can think about are having our kids show up hungry, but not like overly hungry to that like hangry point. So I know we talked about kind of avoiding the grazing between meals. We don't necessarily just want to be offering foods and beverages all day long besides water. But we also don't want our kids to be like starving and overly hungry at the meals too. So it is okay to offer even like a little bit of an appetizer if you find that your kids are coming to dinner like hangry. So even putting out a little bit of like veggie or fruit to like munch on as you're preparing the meal, that could be totally fine. Or pushing the afternoon snack a little bit later. Sometimes having that afternoon snack like in the car after activities on the way home, that can help kind of satiate them until dinner time. So just paying attention to when some of that maybe hangriness is coming up, if it is at all. And then always, I think I mentioned this in the last slide, is like always including that at least one food that each family member enjoys. So again, kind of those starchy foods tend to be really popular with kids, right? So kind of having maybe one or two of those at each meal to make sure that there's something that's going to be pleasant and easily accessible for that child. And then offering new foods without pressure. So this is where I think it can get a little bit frustrating sometimes as parents, because we might be offering maybe a new vegetable that maybe ends up going untouched. So this can happen. And having those foods just on the table with everything else, maybe offering it multiple times that week too. So if maybe it doesn't get eaten the first night, offering say another round of like the roasted carrots again the next night. Because it can take multiple times of offering something for a child to feel ready to try it. And they don't necessarily have to taste the food for it to count as like a new exposure, because we have all of these different senses that we can use at the table. The kids might even just be looking at this food. They might see like, oh, there's carrots on the table today. That's new. Or maybe they're putting it on their plate the next day, or even just like touching it or smelling it. These are all ways to help encourage that exposure without pressure. And then maybe ultimately they might lick it or taste it, take a bite at some point, but still just trying to keep that pressure low. That tends to be really helpful, even though I know it's like so easy to feel frustrated and wanting that taste to go quicker, especially because cooking meals is a lot of hard work. um, we also want to remember to look at food intake throughout the day, or throughout the whole day and the whole week rather than at each meal. Because that's another common question that I get from clients is, oh, my child really doesn't eat any protein at their lunch, or maybe they're not eating protein at every single meal. But ultimately thinking, what are they eating throughout the day or throughout the week? So are there some colorful foods coming in? Are there some proteins? Are there some calcium rich foods? Like, are all these foods coming in at some point? That's kind of what we want to focus on, versus every single meal doesn't have to be perfectly balanced for our kids. And then, as we've been talking about, just keeping that consistency, having those predictable meal times and snack times can just be really helpful for even our own sanity of knowing, even if our child doesn't eat a lot at this meal, they have another opportunity coming up to have another meal. So if you know dinners are not feeling great at your household, maybe there's a child that's not eating a ton at dinner, but you can get that evening snack in to help make sure they have a full belly for bedtime. That can be really helpful as like a way to support that food intake throughout the day. And eating together, having those family meals whenever possible. I think this doesn't have to be perfect. I feel like with our busy schedules day to day, with parents' work schedules and after school activities and sports and things like that, it's okay if not every dinner is like sitting down at the table having this like long conversation. It can look different day to day, but just trying to have that connection and consistency whenever you can. And bringing in some flexibility. So this is something where I would maybe get into more of, with clients that are maybe having more specific challenges. So feel free to ask questions if there are specific things you want more support around. And I wanted to put this slide up too, if there are things that are coming up for your family that maybe are feeling more like red flags, because this division of responsibility doesn't work perfectly for all kids and all families. There are some things that can come up that can make it a little bit more complicated. So some things to look out for are first, poor growth or weight loss. So if you're noticing at the pediatrician visit, your child's weight is kind of falling off the growth curve, that's a good sign, or a red flag to look out for. Nutrient deficiencies can also come up sometimes, whether that's I see like vitamin D deficiencies often, or sometimes iron deficiencies. These are things to think about nutrition wise. Food allergies can also make things more complicated. Or if you find that your child you're noticing is becoming pickier and pickier, like say that those accepted food lists is just shrinking down to only a few foods, that's another red flag. Feeding difficulties, so maybe difficulties chewing, swallowing, or kind of more things like that can be helpful to get support from like a feeding therapist. Fear or avoidance of certain foods or whole food groups. So one that I hear sometimes is like carbs, maybe feeling all of a sudden like they're not eating breads and rices and things like that they normally would love. Some of those starchy foods, that's like maybe a good sign that there is something going on, maybe more of an eating disorder. Especially too long and difficult meal times can also be a red flag. So if your child is maybe taking like extremely small bites or breaking up their food, maybe just taking a really long time to get through the meal. Like a typical dinner is maybe, 20, 30 minutes max, right? Some probably oftentimes shorter than that. So if you're finding you're just like sitting at the table for a really long time, having to just like force and wait for that eating to happen, that can indicate more of those difficult meal time. Oh, and then going back to this slide, a lot of these red flags can be something that you could get support with from a nutrition visit. But again, more of the feeding difficulties, such as like swallowing and chewing, feeding therapists can also be really helpful for that. All right, so I want to get into talking a little bit about some ideas. And this is too where if there's something at the end that you want more support around, feel free to put in that question and answer box. But packing school lunches is something that I find that parents are always asking more and more about. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit. So some of the like sort of general things I like to focus on is first, just like knowing that you want to just pack a little bit more than maybe you think your child's going to eat. So that's like literally packing a little bit more food, but also choosing, offering several options. So going back to that slide we talked about with the different meal components, maybe offering a couple of things in each category, especially if you kind of have more of a picky eater. You want to make sure they're getting at least a couple of those categories in. So maybe you're packing like 2 proteins, 2 starches, a fruit, like kind of choosing a couple things that you know they're going to like. And also asking for their input when you feel stuck. That can be helpful. And maybe trying to include at least 1 to 2 of their preferred foods. So those foods that you know you absolutely can trust that they're going to eat those. They always eat it. And then maybe including even a new food that you think they might not eat that's maybe going to come back in their lunchbox, but that's still another opportunity to have an exposure. So they're maybe out of the house, they're with their friends, maybe their friend will say like, oh, I had that in my lunch too. Maybe they'll be more likely to try it. Maybe it'll come home in the lunchbox, but still having that opportunity there if you want to go for it. So some of the proteins I listed here, I feel like protein's a common one at lunch that I find parents have challenges with. I think we all know, like, of course, like a turkey sandwich or, you know, some of those lunch meats can be a super easy option for kids at their lunchtime. But here are some other ideas. So maybe doing like an individually packed Greek yogurt or cottage cheese, or making a little parfait with one. If you have like a little container, you could scoop some in and put some of their favorite things in there. Like say they love berries, you could kind of like mash those in and maybe add some other topping, like peanut butter can work really well in the Greek yogurt too. It's kind of making some sort of a parfait or just bringing that cup in their lunch. Edamame is another really fun protein option. I think we don't always remember this one as a protein since it is kind of a vegetable, but edamame has a ton of protein, and you can buy the edamame pods in the frozen veggie aisle normally, and they tend to be a fun, like really well accepted protein for many kids because you get to like, you know, pull out the seeds, and it's kind of a fun thing to do. You can also buy the ones that are already shelled if your kid prefers that. I also love legume-based pastas. So a lot of times kids are, you know, love noodles and pasta, but having a more of a legume-based one can help add some fiber and protein. One of my favorites to recommend is the lupini bean pasta. I think it's from like the Brahmi brand. That one is like the most well-accepted one I found because it does have some wheat in it too. So it's not a good option if you're like a gluten-free household, but it has pretty good amount of protein and fiber, and yeah, it tastes pretty good too. So you could do like even just like butter or cheese on there, but you're still getting some good fiber and protein from the legumes in the base. Also love making like nut or seed energy bites or bars. So essentially like a homemade granola or protein bar. That can be a fun activity to do with your kids too if they like to help in the kitchen. That's a really fun, easy, like no bake option. Tons of recipes online for that. Egg and tuna salads can also be great if your kid doesn't like mayo or your household doesn't like mayo. You could do avocado based, like a mashed avocado and an egg or tuna salad, or like a yogurt base. That can also work well too. Using some leftover meats or tofu or meatballs from the dinner before can also be great. So having like a thermos to keep it warm, if that helps with acceptance. Especially if you saw your child loved the protein that was like served at dinner, you could kind of bring it into their lunch the next day. And then finding ways to add produce. This is another typical challenge area for a lot of families. Doing some sort of like sliced veggies and dip can be great. I think there can be a lot of like questions and misconceptions about dips, but ranch, whatever it needs to be, if it helps your kid eat more vegetables, I think the benefits really outweigh any like negative aspects from the dips. So that can be an awesome way to get more vegetables in. And if your child doesn't love like raw vegetables, you could even do like a roasted veggie and a dip, or like a slightly like a blanched vegetable. So it's like maybe quickly cooked and cooled so that it's just slightly cooked. That can help if they don't like the fully raw, overly crunchy veggies. I know some kids just love the raw veggies, but some really prefer a little bit more cooked, especially if they're like a younger kid, then they're going to need that softness too. Seasonal fruits. So kind of picking fruits in season tends to be great for finding things that are more flavorful. So if you're picking like this time of year, I've been talking to clients a lot about the citrus fruits that are available, especially like PCC. They have like every different type that you can imagine. It could be a fun thing to do if you're like at the grocery store, having the kids help choose from the fruits that are kind of on the seasonal display. And yeah, those are going to be better tasting in season than they are out of season. So maybe more likely to accept those. And then going back to the energy bites or bars that you can make at home, incorporating some dried fruit into there, especially if you can find like an unsweetened dried fruit. Like I love doing like chopped dates or apricots. That can really add a lot of great fiber to some of those bars and help just get more of that good fiber and produce into their diets. For younger kiddos, especially like toddler age or older infants, doing some sort of like green in and especially like a pancake. I feel like there's a lot of blender pancake recipes out there right now, like different cottage cheese or like oat and banana base. But you can add a handful or two of spinach in there too, and it kind of helps to add in a little bit of that green veggie, especially for the younger toddlers and older infants that maybe can't necessarily eat leafy greens super easily, but incorporating them into something like a pancake that they can hold and then get a little bit through there. If your child likes smoothies, that can be another opportunity too. I think as we're getting into hopefully spring here soon. It's still pretty cold and rainy in Seattle. But as we're getting more into the warmer months, smoothies tend to be a great option to add to a breakfast or maybe incorporate into an after school snack. And you can really add a lot of colorful produce into there. So some of my favorite things are doing like frozen cherries or berries in a smoothie, adding any sort of green like spinach. Cauliflower rice also tends to work really well and doesn't change the color of the smoothie. So if your child doesn't like a green smoothie, totally fair. You can do some cauliflower rice. But cooked beets also can work really well in a berry smoothie, kind of to amplify that red color, make them really pretty and pretty delicious too. And one more thing to add some more fruit and veggie are like a muffin. So there's a lot of different muffin recipes out there that you can incorporate some like shredded zucchini or carrot or apple or like mashed banana. A lot of times recipes, if it has like maple syrup or honey, you could do some applesauce or mashed banana in place of that, a little bit of that sugar, and that just adds more fiber if you're just doing like a whole fruit like applesauce or banana. So yeah, just little ways to add it in. It doesn't necessarily have to be a whole fruit or veggie in their lunch. You could incorporate it another way, like those, the pancakes or the bites or the muffins. Those can help if your kiddo doesn't love like the texture of the fruits or something like that. Okay, keep moving here. So let's talk a little bit more about dinners. We've touched on maybe some of these tips already, but kind of wanted to bring it all together. Again, just keeping those preferred foods on the list wherever possible, I think really helps just with that calmer mealtime and like more peace of mind for parents. So if we know there's at least 1 to 2 preferred foods for each family member, we know that everybody's going to have something to eat. And again, it doesn't have to be this perfectly balanced dinner. We have to think about their whole day. I would recommend finding a way to save favorite recipes and meals. So as somebody who does, I do a lot of the cooking, as you probably expect in my household, and I forget what my family likes. We go through like spurts of like cooking one thing, and then I forget about this other recipe that we loved a few months ago. So I love having an organization method to help when you're, at that point where you're feeling stuck, you don't know what to make next. You can kind of go back to this saved thing to get some new ideas. And my favorite one is there's an app called Plan to Eat. I think it's like $5 a month or so, and it's great for organizing recipes. You can like enter them in yourself. You can copy them in from, say, like a blog. It like enters it automatically for you, super easy. Or you can enter one from like a cookbook that you love. But that just helps to kind of organize it, so you can go back to it and see like, okay, what are some soups that we could do? Or what are some pastas that my family loves? You could also just have like a Google document too for something that would be free. Could even share it with the other caregiver of your household or different adults that are maybe helping with the cooking. Or even older teens could be on those documents too, to kind of help add and contribute. But this just really helps with some of the decision fatigue. I think as most parents and caregivers are just making decisions all day long for their family, it can be really exhausting to then have to come home and like come up with dinner. So having those saved resources can really help. I also love recommending theme nights for especially weeknights when we're the busiest, or usually the most busiest days. So some of these themes could be like, say like Taco Tuesday, or like Monday night, we're always going to do a soup, or Pizza Fridays. Like things like that can help with, again, just like reducing those decisions, but also kind of creating some fun rhythm rituals for your family. Like if you know, okay, every Friday we're going to do pizza night and we're like going to do homemade fun toppings or something like that. It's also something that your family could look forward to and just expect. So it kind of adds to that predictability of the meal times too. You don't necessarily have to do like the same like literal meal every week. You could do, say, taco night and then do like chicken tacos or like veggie tacos or bean-based tacos. So you could kind of really switch it up, or do like tacos or quesadillas or something like that, just to keep that variety in. And then another way that we could help support your dinners is just to add to things that are already working. Like say, as you're thinking, as we're going through this presentation, if you remember like, okay, yeah, we do have like 5 to 10 family dinners that work really well, but maybe don't have all of those things that we talked about, all those components. So maybe you're noticing, oh, not all the meals have a veggie, or maybe not all the meals have a protein. So then you could think about adding to them. So maybe adding on a protein to, say, like a pasta dinner that you do often, or maybe incorporating a roasted veggie on the side of that pasta dinner, or incorporating a veggie into the pasta. So kind of finding some ways to just like elevate the meals that you're already doing, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And then, of course, asking for help when needed. There are a lot of great resources out there now to kind of help with some of these strategies we're talking about. So, for example, there's like the meal kits and meal delivery services like HelloFresh and things like that, where they kind of reduces some of those decisions and chopping and prep work for you. So those can be really fun. Or incorporating some even like takeout as a theme, like that's perfectly acceptable. I think if you're kind of wanting to have like one meal that's like totally off your to-do list, that can be a really great way to then really focus on highlighting those other days of the week. All right. And then I have quite a few resources here that I've talked a little bit about in today, some of these, but I want to go through them really quick too, just so you can have them on your list. Feel free to like take a picture of this page. So first is the Ellen Satter Institute. This is who developed that division of responsibility. I love her website for other family feeding resources. You can find some various blogs and things, and on like specific family feeding challenges. For those with younger kids, and maybe like toddlers and older infants. The baby dietitian is a really fun follow on Instagram, and she has a great website. She has some really fun ideas for older infants and toddlers, especially if you're doing kind of like baby-led weaning. Solid Starts is also a great resource for that age group. And then Yummy Toddler Food and Feeding Littles are both great. Yummy Toddler Food has a lot of great recipes, especially for some of those ways to fit in more produce. So different muffins and pancakes and things like that you can like blend and mix in various produce options like berries, greens, sweet potato, meatballs, like things like that. They have a ton of great recipes on that website. I've used many of them for my family. And some different books. The one I mentioned at the beginning, How to Raise an Intuitive Eater. This is a great place to start if you're just kind of starting to think about relationship with food for your family and wanting to kind of foster a healthy relationship to food for your kids. That's a great book. It's pretty long, so if you're not wanting to read it all, like the audiobook version could be a great option to kind of put on in the background when you're doing things around the house. Solid Starts for Babies, it kind of goes along with that app and website, Solid Starts. I also love Responsive Feeding. That book is great for, again, just kind of building some of these lower stress mealtime environments. And then Ellen Satter's book, Secrets of Feeding a Healthy Family, is good as well. Oh yeah, and then we have this here will be our next Lunch and Learn. But thank you so much, everybody, for joining. And for those of you that are watching the recording of this later, I hope it was helpful. And for any of these specific questions or needs too, you can always reach out to us to schedule more of a one-on-one support visit. I would love to support you there. We also have this next Lunch and Learn coming up in April with our provider, Eileen. She'll be talking about nutrition and gut health, right? And a couple of other things to note. We do take insurance at our clinic. These are the plans that we're in network with, and we serve clients in Washington, but also many other states. So yeah, we'd love to support you if you're looking for more nutrition support with your family.